Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I'm your co-host, Abby.
And I'm your co-host, Chris.
And tonight we are discussing Carbon Creek, the second episode of Season 2. Carbon Creek had a teleplay by Chris Black, was written by Rick Berman, Brannon Braga, and Dan O'Shannon, and it was directed by James Conter. Fun note, this is the same team that did Shockwave Part 2 that we reviewed last time.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, isn't that cool? And it aired on September 25th, 2002. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue our read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time, so you have been warned. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for the Captain's Log. Okay, Chris, let's go.
Captain Star Log Supplemental.
When Archer and Trip ask T'Pol to tell them a story, T'Pol tells them a story about the time her great-grandmother crash-landed on Earth in 1957, rewriting Earth's history books regarding first contact with Vulcans.
Oh, it's a good one. So now it's time to deploy our subspace amplifiers and get into this episode. We'll start with a quick chat about the cold open, my personal favorite part of any episode, and then we'll head into our pros and decons section. Still funny.
Mm-hmm.
Each of us will share 3 of our favorite parts of the episode, and then if there are things that don't gel with us, we'll have a discussion on any decons from the episode. You might hear a dog bark in this discussion if somebody's Porthos Pick is mentioned, but we'll still discuss them all later on in the first section. So let's start with the cold open here. And I'm going to start because I have to say, this cold open reminds me that want to tell me a story, or the framing of it all being around a story, a lot of like The Princess Bride or The Never-Ending Story, all those good movies that I watched coming up where it's the story within a story. And I just think that's an intriguing beginning to an episode, because you know that it's really going to be 2 things running parallel. And I have always liked this framing where you get to hear people responding like the audience insert. And that's what Trip and Archer are in this. And you see it from the very beginning, the back and forth, the banter. And then when she jumps into the story, that it's just a cool way to make the show go back and forth and to get some exposition out. So I was really happy to see when we start this episode that we're going to have that kind of format. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I enjoy this format too, this framing device, because the stakes are low for the crew. Like it can't be that every week you're in dire, threat. So it's a really nice palate cleaner after last week with Shockwave Part 2. And just the rapport between those 3, the big 3 of Enterprise, is delightful to watch. Every scene when we go back to the dining room is just something I just want to stay in a lot longer.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it shows you, they said this is her 1-year anniversary, which is not just record breaking, but record shattering for 365 days, besides 10 with the last Vulcan. And so bravo to Paul for a record there. But I think it shows how much trust and how much friendship and how much respect there is in there. I mean, this is the beginning of the how old is T'Pol joke, these scenes in here. And while I think some of it comes off as a little campy and a little corny, that is really Archer.
Yeah.
Archer is kind of a little campy and a little corny. Like, he'd be the one laughing at our decon joke every week because that's kind of him, and like the fake stern that he does. But they never would have done that a year ago. So I think it's not only is the story within a story a cool framing, but the moment that they're pausing here on is the anniversary of T'Pol. And that's so meaningful, but to not make like a huge deal out of it, it's a really nice way to show the deepening of this relationship, especially when they go back and forth about giving each other their annual evaluations. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's funny.
Well,
Because we all think that when we get evaluated.
oh yeah. I used to not regard this episode like it was a sweet story, but it didn't do much for the series.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I was wrong because T'Pol's drinking wine.
Yeah.
That's a massive shift in what we know about Vulcans and T'Pol.
Yeah.
Just a year in, and she's this much changed and influenced that she's willing to drink celebratory wine with the humans, right?
Yeah.
That's a big marker for this character that we can't overlook. And I think I overlooked that in the past. So, again, all these little details of the character development for T'Pol are remarkable.
Yeah. And, I think that's some nice connection in here between T'Pol on Enterprise and Mistral back on Earth. I mean, he eats the pretzels with his fingers, and we
Yes.
don't. And that contradicts the Vulcans don't eat with their hands. He suggests eating the deer.
Mm,
And he even drinks a beer, it looks like later
yeah.
on. So maybe he was trying to act human, but the parallels there between T'Pol doing these things and him doing these things are really neat upon repeated viewings and knowing the series really well.
Yeah. And aside from the T'Pol stuff, I just like going back to the rapport between the three, that's what makes Star Trek palatable.
Yeah.
There's these high concept ideas, philosophy, ethics, sci-fi, which can, lose people sometimes. But the characters and the rapport between them, that's why we watch. That's why we keep coming back. And these scenes are great. It just makes me think of 10 forward scenes and mess hall scenes on Voyager, the promenade, just walking around there.
Yeah.
And just with the characters in those moments. So
there's a lot of people sitting around tables in Star Trek, but people sitting around tables in Enterprise is probably one of my favorite things. Because it's always about the food then too.
yes, and they do it a lot. It's a
Yes.
convention.
Yes.
One of the major conventions of Enterprise.
Absolutely. So on that positive note, let's head ourselves into our pros and decons here. So let's start out with yours this time. Chris, why don't you tell us your first pro for this episode?
All right, my first pro is about the Jack College storyline. I love this young actor. He's doing a great job playing against Jolene and everyone else. And he's really like that symbolic representation of humanity's potential, like in a person in this story. He's held back by money and an absent father, right? But still dreams to become something more than what he is and just learn. And he soaks up and explores as best he can, but just by going to a library.
Yeah. And, I think this character was so well done because you could see he was such a teenager, but one of those like awkward, didn't quite fit in, a little bit smarter than those around him, not interested in the same stuff kind of thing. And so he was talking to the adults that were at his mom's bar. He was seeking out, the new people who have other interests and other places that they've been because he is that kind of kid. And one of the things I really appreciated was this kid was never played as having a crush on T'Pol or wanting to figure stuff out. He was so respectful, so genuine, so just interested and kind and genuine, but also not in the way where you're like, oh my god, this kid eye rolling, too perfect. No, he felt like a real kid, and you really wanted him to have the success, and you almost wish that was at the end of the story when she looks back and went, oh yeah, she sold the Velcro and got this money and this kid went to college, and then guess who he turned out to be. And like, I would like to know the end of that story too. So there's another fanfic out to the universe. Somebody write it. I will promote it.
Well, but I'm going to push against you because I'm glad he didn't become someone amazing that we know, like a founder in human history, because it shows that just the ordinary humans are capable of a lot. And that's what's kind of shifting Tamir's views of humanity, which allows her to like sympathize with Mistral and allow him to stay there, because she finally saw humanity's potential.
What he'd been saying.
Yes, exactly, the whole time. So yeah, I want to know what he wants to do too, but I really like that we don't, because it's just a message that the ordinary people, we're good enough and we can strive to be more
Yeah,
too.
I like
Maybe that's
that.
corny, but that's me.
Well, but this is kind of a corny episode, and you're going to hear me say that a lot in here. It's a very different tone. It reminded me a little bit of the tone of Rogue Planet back from season 1, where Archer remembers the lady from the poem from a long time ago, and it's got that kind of romance movie destiny kind of thing thrown in there. And I don't know, it's a little bit more schmaltzy than the normal Enterprise episode or Star Trek episode would be. And it reminds me when there usually is one a season where they try to pull at those heartstrings that way for you.
Well, and like I said, it's a great change of tone and pace from Shockwave Part 2 and from what's going to come next. So I appreciate it right now a lot more than I used to.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And my first pro kind of comes from that too. I really enjoyed the whole Prime Directive struggle that they had through here. And I enjoyed that they wanted to make sure that they weren't contaminating, but once they realized that in order to survive they had to be a part of it, I enjoyed almost having them as the pro-humanity, anti-humanity, and neutral when they had discussions. And I really enjoyed that there was kind of that triangle to play with in there and to hear all the different discussions. And nobody was really wrong when they were talking about things. And depending on how you looked and how you had explored and how much you'd gotten to know humanity, the opinions were very different. And I think it was very interesting to see that T'Pol comes from a line of Vulcan women who are not afraid to kind of bend their Vulcanness here and there. And that plays a lot into a lot of beta canon fan theories, all that about her heritage. But we see her mom as well later on in the series, who is also not really afraid to push rules and fight back and bend her Vulcanness from what is right now at this time considered traditional. And I think it was interesting to see Jolene play two different people from kind of two different sides of that in the same episode. And that was a big pro for me.
Yeah, I mean, her and Tamir are very much alike.
Yeah.
Which is, it's hard to differentiate Vulcans played by the same actor, because Vulcans are kind of one note in a way. I mean, Mistral is very different. I love Mistral. But yeah, it is really fascinating to think that T'Pol has this in her history.
Yeah.
In her lineage. And there's such a sentimental connection to it for her that she keeps the purse on board Enterprise.
Yeah. Purse and I have a moment. We'll get to that.
Okay, with that object and that last scene in mind, go back and rewatch the pilot. And it's like after a year on Enterprise, she finally gets Tamir's story, and it becomes something she actually understands. You know how when you're a kid growing up, you hear these stories that your the parents tell you.
Yep.
You don't actually get them, or movies you watch. You don't actually get them until life experience helps you connect with it. So
exactly,
that was another powerful moment for me with the purse. Going back in time retroactively to the pilot, informing this character.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, here's my little, sorry, I know we're in pros, but my tiny little decon about the purse is, why was that what Tamir kept? I would think there would have been other things that she would have kept over her purse. I mean, it just...
I have a theory.
All right, go for it.
She gave Jack his chance with that purse. She brought the money home in that purse. So maybe, I don't know.
Maybe. It it feels like it wouldn't have been the thing that I would have taken with me, nor what I would have expected her to. I would have expected her maybe to take a book or the candle from the bar that she meditated with, or it didn't feel like it was an important enough piece of the story for me, even with having put the money in it, for it to have been the thing she saved. But that's just me.
From a production standpoint, if it was a candle, okay, it's a candle. If it was a book, okay, they have books. But that kind of 1950s purse is, clashing with the style of the Enterprise. So that visually is interesting looking.
Story, it makes good story, and
Yeah.
I am willing to hand wave a lot of things for good story.
Well, and I get your point though. Why would a Vulcan keep that sentimentally? Right.
Yeah, and especially that. Like, women in purses, it's a very personal thing, and I get that, but it also feels, there's a lot of history with why women have purses and not pockets and all that, and I that's just little feminist me over here. But
no, that's a great
all right,
point.
we're in the pros.
Yes.
So let's move on to your second pro.
Well, it's about T'Pol again.
Yay!
And how T'Pol's story rewrites human history, specifically linking First Contact, a beloved movie, and a foundational moment in the Star Trek universe, to Enterprise. One of the strengths of Enterprise is its connections, its connective tissue, as you've said before, to First Contact. And anytime they can make those connections, I think we get a hit of dopamine or whatever in our brains as fans. And also just Trip's reaction, like, you're rewriting the history books there. That it's just a wonderful, fun moment. And I don't know, I like that world building. That's it. It's a short pro.
No, it's a great one. And you're right. I like that too. And I always like when you get Trip when he's awed by something that really is blowing his mind. Because sometimes they can play up the, aw shucks Southerner kind of thing from him just for the laugh of it. But I really like it because you can see his mind kind of calculating through all this and thinking it through. And then, and this is funny because I guess it's a tiny little decon too, but we never get the rest of the story about the possible not first man on the moon. I want to know that. Enterprise does that all the time. They're like throwing out these little tidbits. Here's what you need to know about this. Oh, no, we're going to cut away. Here's what you need to know about this. Oh, no, we're not actually going to explain it now. I would like the end of that story.
Yes.
But it is really neat to see that. And they are the perfect trio to bounce all that back and forth with.
Absolutely. So what is your next pro?
All right, so this isn't going to surprise anyone at all, but I have to talk about the costumes in this one. And I have to tell you, this was almost my Porthos pick. It was a last minute change out for something else, but the period piece work here is gorgeous. I mean, the jewelry, the shoes were really fun. I mean, somebody had a good time playing in Paramount's costume department, getting this one going. And that's fantastic. And all of those looks are great. But what I really want to talk about is the Vulcan uniforms before they crash.
Oh, yeah.
They're so cool. Like, they're obviously not leather because they wouldn't be into that. But whatever kind of pleather or space age fabric they have, they're gorgeous. The coloring is beautiful. The stitching that makes all the different geometric shapes, it matches the like old Vulcan shuttle interiors with all of that those straight lines and the precision, and then just the plain white undershirt underneath. Those are so beautiful. And I would wear a jacket like that just as a jacket because they are impeccable costuming. And as they change into their more, fitting in clothing, all I can think is, God, I hope they save those somewhere because they're so cool. So the costuming in this just gets an A+ all around. It is very, very well done.
Yeah, it reminds me of a joke from Jerry Seinfeld. I believe it's Jerry Seinfeld, where he's teasing about how why do all aliens from other planets wear all the same clothes and they got a V on their chest, and these Vulcans, they have a V on their chest. And obviously they don't have V, they don't have an English V in their alphabet, but it's a V for Vulcans on their chest. Love that.
It is funny. But it's one of the things that I have to say, the Vulcan aesthetic carries through Enterprise so beautifully, and all of the costumes and all of the sets and all of the ships and all of that. And that is something that is also carrying through now to Strange New Worlds, which I really appreciate. Their Vulcan aesthetic, you see those tie-ins to Enterprise and where they started.
Discovery did it too.
Yeah, Discovery did a beautiful job of it too. And it's just so cool to see modern Trek finding those reference points and just taking them that one little step further, but you still always feel that classic Vulcan geometry. I mean, hey, they played pool in this episode too. It's a simple geometric game.
It wouldn't challenge a Vulcan child.
Exactly. This is just so Vulcan, and they're one of my favorite costumes on the series probably, and they're only there for like 10 minutes, but they're really, really good.
They're really good. And I love that the white undershirt too with the collar. I don't know why. It's like I want to see some pips on those collars. Perhaps this is where like some Vulcan inspiration on the next gen uniforms in universe, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'll go to my final pro, which is another T'Pol. Man, I'm all about T'Pol today.
It's hard not to be.
It's true. So it's another small one, but I love it. I think it adds a lot to her character. I love how T'Pol messes with Trip and Archer at the end. Right? It's this rare humor. And, some of my favorite humor comes from Tuvok, right? Or Spock. It's the unexpected moments of humor where they're sarcastic and dry. Exactly. And T'Pol's great.
And she tells Trip, what do you mean? Like when he says the wine went to your head, she gives him that look of, are you accusing me of being intoxicated? And it's just perfect.
Yes.
I think that wine's gone to your head.
What are you implying?
Two Vulcans stroll into a bar, hustle a few games of pool, and walk out with an armload of TV dinners. It sounds like an old episode of The Twilight Zone.
If you're not interested in hearing the rest.
Hold on. We didn't say we weren't interested.
Oh, yeah, it's a really fun scene. And, I have to say that I like how when you watch them in this scene, everybody kind of just, it's so gentle. Everybody they're ribbing at each other, but it's so kind and it's so loving. And it's so nice to see when you think about 1 season ago, 1 year ago, they were trying to shoot each other in a cave thinking there were rock monsters. And now they're sitting down and sharing a meal and stories and comfortable enough to just be like family. And that's why this has always kind of felt like my family. I was watching Enterprise when I was first out living on my own, away from my family, and watching them grow and find themselves in a new place with new people and like forge relationships was what I was doing. So this is the kind of scene that really just it feels good to me to see our crew having that growth.
Well, and just to think of it from perhaps an actor's point of view, which I'm not an actor, although we're educators, so it's a performing art.
Yes, we are.
But they just get to sit around and have a human conversation.
Yeah.
No reversing polarity. And I love all that stuff. No ship shaking acting. They're just people talking around a meal about a grandmother, right? And I could just imagine these characters are relieved and they're digging in, and you can see the joy on their face. They're just having so much fun. And I just love that line where T'Pol just says, you asked me to tell you a story.
It was a good one. But did it really happen?
As I said, you asked me to tell you a story.
Damn, Captain. She put one over on us.
You did go to Carbon Creek.
If you check my record, you'll note that I also visited Yellowstone Park and the Carlsbad Caverns. I'm a scientist. That includes geology. Thank you for the meal.
My pleasure. You've certainly kept us entertained.
Good night.
It's just perfect line delivery. And Trip's just like, and it was a good one, but really, did it happen? I just love that back and forth. I think it's one of my favorite moments in the episode. So that's why it's my last pro.
Well, and that's perfect because it kind of leads into mine, because the last bite of that scene where you see Archer and Trip just look at each other and they just kind of shrug and roll their eyes and they're like, dang, she got us, kind of leads into mine. I really liked in the scene where the Vulcan ship comes and picks them up, all of the subtleties and the unspoken that was going on in that scene. First of all, the lighting in that scene is absolutely gorgeous because it's all coming from the side, like it was out the ship door. And I think it adds a beautiful amount of drama to the scene. And you're seeing them come out of the shadows. So it's almost like half lit and half dark. They're coming from one world, going to another. And the moment that T'Pol says to the captain that picks them up that Mestral died, and then you look at Strawn and she looks at Strawn and he's just completely deadpan, but there's that pause where he looks at her, because this wasn't just a choice she made for her. She made this choice and he had to go along with it because she was still the commanding officer. And this was the moment that it was either going to work or not. And that silent beat that they had there was beautiful because it shows, yes, I'm agreeing with you. This is the right thing to do for our comrade, for our coworker, for our friend at that point. And just that little pause then that Tamir does, looking back, like she's almost looking to see if he changed his mind and he's there, or looking back to see if, to see humanity with her own eyes for one last time. That last scene is really gorgeous, and it happens in the time without dialogue.
Yes. The quiet little moments.
Yeah. And this is a good episode for those quiet little moments, for sure.
Well, and it's because it's kind of low stakes. And there's very little technobabble at all. So it's just a story about characters, and I really appreciate that last moment too. Well said.
All right. So we had a few little blips and things that didn't gel moving in, but let's talk about decons. So, Chris, did you have anything you wanted to point out for a decon this time?
I have two.
Me too.
The first one is small. How does Mistral know that he must declare which pocket the 8-ball will go into?
I think that every time.
Like, it's not like he saw and observed a game first and picked up the rules real quick. He just had to know, like, he just had to know it. So
yeah.
But I love that scene. Like, sometimes watching people play pool on TV is kind of boring. To me,
yes.
The Voyager ones never really did much to me, but this one was good. I don't know why. It was just,
the camera angles were very different.
Yes.
They were more table.
Yes.
Like you were watching the balls on the table as if you were in the pocket. Whereas in the Voyager scenes, you're almost always looking down at the table.
And there's this percussive rhythm, the way it's all edited together. Pop, pop, pop.
Yes. Yeah, directorially it was a good choice, but I always think to myself, okay, maybe he was just really paying attention to the game while T'Pol was having the conversation with Maggie, and somebody said that and we just didn't hear it, and that's what we're supposed to assume, that he was watching and picking it up. But yeah, I think that too.
Yeah, that's my small one. Do you want to go your first one?
Sure. My first one, which is going to be small, is I'm just not going to let it go without mentioning how absolutely stupid it is that they have Tamir change behind the sheet and then come out and prove to you with her bareback that she is not wearing any undergarments. Those must be in those fabulous Vulcan costumes, which make them even more fabulous if they have built-in support. Just saying. But that's all I want to say about that, because it was done for ratings, and poor Jolene.
Don't you know Vulcan mental discipline allows them to defy gravity?
Awesome. So now it's more like the Force. There we go.
Yeah. No. No. She can just control every cell in her body.
Even better.
No, I wasn't going to bring it up, but
I know you weren't. But we can't let that one go.
Ridiculous. It is a crime, and Yeah. I, it, you know, this is, I'll just say this. Shockwave point two, Hoshi, shirt off,
Yeah.
makes it as a joke on her.
Mm-hmm.
Tamir, shirt off, shirt off or body seen behind the screen, and it's a joke. She can't put the dress on right. So it's like, it's
Mm-hmm.
so manipulative and just, anyway. Next, because if we focus on this all the time, we'll be doing this a lot because Enterprise unfortunately does
Exactly.
this a lot. But it would be irresponsible for us not to point it out because it needs to be called out.
This one is
Oh
gratuitous.
yeah.
So, all right. So, what's your bigger one that might warrant a bit of discussion?
So yeah, I think this is so like I think we've both mentioned to each other in the past that Carbon Creek isn't as high on our list as it's supposed to be in fandom. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
Yes.
It's not bad. I've never disliked it, but I've never been like, oh, it's my favorite episode of Enterprise. And I think I figured out why.
Good, because it turns up on a lot of people's top tens, and I always am like, it's good, but so I can't wait to hear this.
And my ideas are evolving. So who knows if I'll feel like this in a year, but it's low stakes. And that's kind of a drag on the plot. See, like, so I'm a literature teacher. So characters must be actively pursuing something. And conflict comes from barriers and trying to overcome those barriers. These characters, like if it was humans crash landing, the story would be centered around cobbling together the technology to construct some kind of subspace, amplifier or whatever to try and get home. And these guys just kind of, well, we'll just live here now. Now, Mistral, like they have to create tension between Mistral and Tamir, and it's not completely compelling because she has no power over him. She's not actually a barrier at all, and he states that
Yeah.
like the mission's over. You're not in command of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not real tension anywhere in the story, and I think that's why it's a little not as compelling. It's sweet, it's fun, there's great performances, but it's less compelling because there's nothing at stake for the characters. They're not pursuing anything actively with a conflict in the way.
Yeah, it's almost like the story is too gentle. And you already know kind of from the get-go it's going to have a happy ending and they're going to get rescued and so yeah, it's I agree with that. It almost feels like it's lacking the carrot at the end of the stick. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That you're dangling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like her Tamir's representation of conflict is staring disapprovingly right at Mistral from across the street.
Yeah, right after he's making goo eyes, and getting a little frisky going on in the car, which I have to say is a scene I really like because it seems really real. I mean, that's an awkward moment that we have all been in and we have all felt, and it's still so sweet. So that is a heart pulling moment there. And then there's T'Pol, not T'Pol, Tamir, sorry, just standing and that look. Yeah. It's that's a bucket of cold water look right there.
Her stance with one of her feet off out to the side, the rest of her body draped. It's like iconic looking. So like all the pieces in this are really good, but there's not the compelling. The characters aren't active except for Mistral.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I'll talk a little bit more about this when I get to my Vulcans verdict, but let's just say that I agree with you. And I have a different thought after having watched this a couple times through.
Oh, I can't wait. I want to hear yours.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a good one. But okay, this is my other decon here because this is where I get stuck after watching this episode a little bit. I'm thinking about the Vulcans living there for 3 months. First of all, they walk out of that grocery store and they've got TV dinners. Do not tell me there are vegetarian TV dinners back then because there are barely any good vegetarian TV dinners now. So what did they eat? Like, did they just give up and eat meat? This doesn't seem like a town that would be, friendly and having quinoa and all that stuff for T'Pol. So I wonder about that. I wonder about how they got, I mean, I know they said they hustled some pool and then they picked up some odd jobs, but did they wear the same clothes every day until they had enough money to buy clothes? Did they steal more clothes? How did they get a house? Did there just happen to be a house with all the furnishings and like decorations in it just available to rent? And their car never shows up, their broken car outside of town. Nobody goes to look for it. Nobody seems to care. They don't, I mean, I understand with the mine a little bit and that whole Prime Directive that they didn't want to. They were so happy they got their people back. They didn't want to investigate. But one would think that Jack, the super smart, super curious, goes to the library a lot kid, would have at least figured it out enough to have investigated and dug some stuff up. It just, I get that this is a story. I get that this is not the point. This is not a survival tale. This is not a practicality tale. This is an emotional story talking about different views of humanity and Prime Directive. I get that. But all this stuff, the more I watch it, the more I think of the things that I would really like answered about how they hung out there for 3 months.
Oh my gosh. So now this story, earlier said we want to find out what happened to Jack. And in my mind, all of a sudden, poor Jack, he's so smart that he does start investigating, finds evidence, becomes convinced that they were aliens, but no one believes him, and his life is ended in destitute.
Oh no. He's like the guy on Picard.
Yes.
Picard.
Yeah. Oh. Hopefully not. All right.
Hopefully not. But that's the practical in me. Yeah. And that's the mom in me. And honestly, it's because I have been vegetarian in the past for a long time. And I know what it's like to try to exist in the American world as a vegetarian now, as opposed to 50 years ago. Like, no, that more than it would have been difficult. Just that part.
But not even being vegetarian. Try existing as a human that wants to eat healthy.
Yeah.
Without
there's only so much tomato soup you're getting in you.
Added with all the things that are added into in our food. So yeah, the Vulcans probably just had to logically
nutritional supplements.
No, they logically just had to eat whatever was there, right? Mestral would be like, bring it on. It's more research.
Yeah, hot dog at the baseball game.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. So after all of that, let's end it with some positives. We have some Porthos picks and nobody mentioned anything during our pros. So I'm assuming that means we each have one more good thing to talk about. So, all right, Chris, let's hear those dogs bark. What do you got for us tonight? What is your favorite part or moment of this episode?
It is Mestral's speech about humanity's future. The whole scene, the whole debate. And I just love how it begins. It begins with the mundane report of repairing Mrs. Garrett's sink, to debating the comparison of humanity's potential and progress to Vulcan's own troubled past and their evolution.
Yeah.
And then it ends with I Love Lucy. So there's this great construction of the scene from the mundane Earth to the philosophical to the mundane Earth again. It's just beautifully constructed from writing perspective. Don't even get me started on the performances. But this is the intellectual core of the episode. And I said it last episode, but without this scene, it's a fine story. With this scene, it's a Star Trek story.
Yeah, and this is where I was talking before about the trio of Vulcans and how they play so well off each other. And this scene, man, the face acting in this scene is gold star, win awards, and it's so clipped and so precise. Everything they say, but everything has so much nuance to it. And you can see the steps that they're each making. And the thing is, it never gets heated. I mean, it's a discussion. It's never an argument. And I know part of that is arguing comes from emotion, but I like Star Trek because I like smart people talking about smart things, and these are smart people talking about smart things, and they disagree, and they're okay with disagreeing, and they're going to figure out a way to solve it and keep going. And that is such a model for 20 years ago and for today. So this is a gorgeous scene.
I don't know. I don't know if Tamir is okay. She stalks him later after the argument.
Okay,
But I get
but
your point. Yeah.
yes, she's being respectful, and she takes what she thinks is the next step, which might be stalkerish. It is, but she didn't come up and knock on the car door.
Yes.
She didn't prevent him. She didn't stun him. She let him have the experience, and then they talked. And that second part of the discussion, after she pulls him out of the cab of the car, well, not pulls him out, but that's very interesting too, because that is the most that you see them actually butt heads like that. That is the closest to an emotional exchange they have, and it's still respectful. It's still nobody goes too far. They stop when they need to stop.
That's it. I think that's the seed of what you helped me discover now. It's the way they speak to each other. They do oppose each other pretty strongly, but they're still respectful to each other, and they don't try to stop each other truly, right? She glares at him from across the street with disapproving eyes. But he's kind of like this awakened child. Like screw you, Mom. I'm going to learn more. This is our reality now. This is reality. It's like his eyes have been opened, and she's still stuck with the we're not living here idea. And what you said about the three, the 3 points of view. It's so good. I need to rewatch it again just to get that. It's like a stage play. This is very stage-like.
Yeah. And those 3 Vulcans parallel our big 3 officers around their table too. I mean, 3 different viewpoints there as well. And it's a nice parallel. Directing and story-wise, this is done well.
It is really well.
All right, so my Porthos pick here, and this is probably also going to surprise nobody who listened to me about the whole last season, but my favorite thing about this episode is the entire thing is framed around a meal.
Oh, yes.
We eat on Enterprise. We eat well. We see their food. There was a food stylist. Thank you, Dorothy Duder. And this whole episode, it starts and ends with, minus the scene with the purse, the whole thing is with the meal, and all of the moments where we see actually our Enterprise crew, or the 3 of them that we actually see in this episode, we see them eating. And it is a little bit better for T'Pol. Her big old scoop of quinoa on the lettuce leaves gets some little like frou-frou things and accoutrements, and so she's got a decent looking meal. She drinks the wine, and you see a really nice, they've got vegetables and chicken and bread for the captain and Trip. And this is just showing you again that the heart of Enterprise often takes place over a meal. And that is so family-like to me, because my family always did when I was a kid, and does now that I'm the mom. We sit around our table every night and we talk and we share and we work things out and we figure things out. And the heart of our family is at our kitchen table. The heart of the Enterprise crew is at a table over a meal. And that's beautiful.
Well, there's something very intimate about eating. Like, if you really think about it, right? We're kind of vulnerable. It's kind of ugly. They're just chewing, all those things. And so we share it, with other people that we're close to. And then add in talking. It's an even more intimate experience. So, yeah, it's really defining these relationships. And I think you're right. Defining Enterprise as a series. No other series is centered around food as much as this.
Well, Strange New Worlds has given us a run for our money, but
true.
Yes, I think but both of those, you're seeing the crew coming together in a more informal way. And this is where you get your character growth. This is where you find your relationships. This is where you have those little moments and those little beats. And whether it's, the senior staff, or it's everybody, or it's, Hoshi and Phlox having dinner, and then Travis comes in. This is where you have those little moments. And it's just perfect that this being the first episode of season 2 that isn't a continuation from season 1, it's reminding you this is where the heart of our show is, over a table.
Oh, well said. Well said.
Well, you can thank Jim Morehouse on Trek Ranks are making me think a lot about tables, because by the time you hear this, his episode on top scenes around a table will have dropped. Go look. It's another one of our cousins on the network. So thanks for making me think about this and tables in Star Trek.
Accessing library computer data.
All right, here on First Flight, we love trivia and behind the scenes tidbits. So we pick a few to share about each episode. So Abby, why don't you start tonight?
All right. So I referred to it a little bit beforehand, but even though we have Reed and Phlox and Mayweather and Sato credited with all of their fine actors, they do not appear. It is the first episode of the season of the series in which Keating, Montgomery, and Park don't appear. So very interesting. Phlox has disappeared here and there, but interesting that we only see our top three there. And my other one that I also referred to a little bit before was this is the 14th consecutive episode to carry either a teleplay or a story credit for Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, ending the run that began with Shadows of Pajem from the previous season. And as of 2022, right now, it's the end of 2022. This still remains the record for the most consecutive Trek episodes credited in some way to the same writers.
Wow, that's a thing.
It is a record for sure.
All right.
What about you, Chris? What did you find out? And I bet you got a good one for us tonight.
Well, I'll start. I have two.
Okay.
I think I want to share, but the first one is I love the Velcro reveal at the end. It doesn't match up with actual history, but interestingly enough, in reality, Velcro was invented by George de Mestral.
Woo!
And so this is where the character Mestral got his name. And his patent, though, was granted in 1955, 2 years before Sputnik and the events in the episode. So it doesn't line up, but it's an interesting little thing in history. So
Yeah.
go Google George de Mestral, and there's some cool stuff there. How he determined Velcro. He was walking in the forest with his dog.
Okay.
Of course, is a dog. And like plants and stuff clung on him, and he took those under a microscope and determined that the hooks and the loops, the hooks of the plants hooked into the loops of his fabric. So he recreated that. I learned something, so that was cool. The other thing I just discovered before we recorded, I was rewatching a scene. I was looking in the episode for a music cue from Jay Chataway that was just like the dun 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 dun. He hides it in a lot of episodes, and I caught it, but I didn't know where it was. But then my eyes fixated on the Vulcans' apartment and their kitchen.
Okay.
And the furniture in the kitchen caught my eye. I was like, that is Benny Russell's kitchen and all of his furniture.
No.
And then I start going into Tricorder and I see it's the same wallpaper from Benny Russell's apartment too.
Unbelievable.
So I love those little connections. So I start trying to get all the screenshots I can find. It's not the same layout of the apartment. Obviously, they've, put it together in different ways. But I almost have to think that window behind Mistral's head when he's watching TV is the window that Benny Russell peers into and sees back Ben Sisko. So cool connection. Everyone check that out. I'll probably post pictures of that when we drop the episode as well.
Oh, absolutely 100% for sure, because that's kind of a goosebump moment when you find a connection like that. Oh, so neat.
It amps up the episode just a little bit for sure.
Yeah. I will never watch this episode again without looking at the wallpaper, and that's so cool.
Definitely. And that's the kind of nerds that we are.
100%. Well, it's come to the time for final thoughts and grappler ratings. Chris, on a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers with half grapplers possible, how do you rate the episode?
I give the episode a 7.5 out of 10. And that's a score because it lacks the appropriate conflict, right? It's less compelling because the characters aren't actively trying to get their way home There's not much at stake. So that's why it loses some points there for me. And also the gratuitous Tamir behind the sheet scene.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as you here. This is a fine episode. There's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of beautiful moments in here, as we've just talked about. But what I've come to realize is this is not my flavor of Trek, because this to me feels more like kind of a Hallmark movie, Star Trek, than it does Star Trek. I mean, we don't even see more than 3 of our main cast in this episode. And when we do see them, it's just little vignettes and aside. And while this is a great episode for the actress Jolene, it is not a great episode for T'Pol, because she doesn't have that much to do besides a few intros and outros and then remembering her purse. She's not in the episode that much. You think this is a T'Pol episode, but really this is a Tamir episode and a Mestral episode, even more so.
Yes.
So it feels like this is an episode of a different show. And while there's nothing wrong with it, and I don't dislike it at all, it's not one of my favorites. And now that I've watched it a bunch of times to do this one, it's going to be one that I don't feel the need to rewatch for a while, because I've definitely had what I need from this one for a while. And that's okay, because I know a lot of people absolutely love this one for exactly the reason that I just said. And that is fine, because everybody's favorite Star Trek is somebody's least favorite and vice versa. But this is a solid episode. So for me, this gets a 7 out of 10 grapplers.
And as a teacher, I think it's important. I have to remind my students all the time. A C means you're a normal person.
Yep.
You're not above the norm. So and there's nothing wrong with that. I've come to like this more this time around than I had in the past, because of all the details and appreciating that. But yeah, it doesn't blow my mind, but I really do like it more than 1159 and Voyager, which is a very similar kind of structured story.
Yeah. Agreed. There's a lot of similarities there. That's one that Snap Trek should do, is Carbon Creek in 1159.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of in agreement, and I like that. It feels like we got this one right for us.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
We want to remind you that we adore getting feedback and thoughts from listeners. We collect them, and starting this season, every few months we will do a mailbag episode where we share and discuss your insights and ideas. So please drop us a line whenever you have something you'd like to share, and you might be featured on our next mailbag show.
And if you'd like to continue the discussion with us or share your Porthos Picks, Grappler ratings, any thoughts, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We are also on YouTube under the Tricorder Transmissions channel. You can reach me personally at Abby M. Summer on Twitter. Chris, what's the best places to find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Shelf Nerds, and also on my YouTube channel, Completing the Shelf.
We want to thank you for spending this time with us. We'll be back next time with Minefield, the 3rd episode of Season 2. Looking forward to that one.
Yes.
As always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer and your moment of Melanie.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.
But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue our read alert.
Tactical alert.
All hands to stations.
I'm sorry, that was a good Malcolm.
No, it wasn't.
It was good enough that I knew it was Malcolm. Okay.
Sorry. I've been listening to a lot of Shuttlepod now.
Yeah. It's a good show.